video where I read and react to some of your controversial opinions about the UFC and MMA. And as I always say, if I haven't gotten to your comment yet, I have an active list going, so I haven't forgotten you. And as always, feel free to add your hot takes in the comments. I'll keep making these for as long as you guys have controversial opinions, because I love these. Today, we're focusing on some of your hot takes about what could have, would have, should have happened, maybe in a slightly alternate universe. So we've got a lot of Khabib, a lot of Conor, and let's get started. And the first hot take today comes from Braun, who said Volk beat Islam their first fight and would have beat him again if he didn't fight on like 8 days' notice and had a full preparation. So I think, first of all, let's look at their first fight. To refresh everyone's memory, it was a unanimous decision for Islam. And I won't bury the lead here. I agree that Volkanovski won this one, or might have won this fight. Let's look at the judges' scorecards. Ben Cartledge, 48-47. Derek Cleary, 49-46. And David Letheby, 48-47. Now, for the sake of conversation, let's set aside the 49-46, and I won't pick apart the entire fight because that would be an entire video of its own. And by the way, if there is like a controversial decision, controversial judge's opinion that you'd like me to react to and judge and give my verdict on, let me know in the comments. But just looking at round one from Alex's and Islam's first fight, right? Which all three judges gave to Islam, but it's especially impactful on the 48-47 cards. I could give that round to Volkanovski, which might be its own hot take, but the important thing to remember about the unified rules is that they state that immediate impact weighs more heavily on the scoring than cumulative impact. And so for that reason, I kind of have to give the edge to Volk's striking in this round over Islam's grappling. Because by technicality, Islam didn't even get a submission attempt in that round. I remember, who were the commentators? I think Bisping was there, but they were joking about how Alex doesn't have a neck, so you can't choke him out. But this is the thing that you have to remember about wrestlers who are not submission artists, who are not jiu-jitsu fighters. If you're wrestling but you're not landing strikes on the ground or actively getting in real submission attempts, then you better hope that you're wrestling for the full 5 minutes, because what do they call it? Effective aggressiveness and area control should not be assessed very often according to the rules. The second round was also very, very tight and went to Islam on all 3 cards. So I think you could have given that one either way, really. And that's the whole point of this fight, is even though I might see it as a Volkanovski win, this is not an instance where I think the judges got it super wrong, and I'm sort of happy to just leave it at, assuming that the judges sensed or saw things that didn't translate through the screen for us at home. But that's also why a rematch made sense. We needed a definite answer on who was the better fighter. We needed a definite winner. So in the rematch, as Braun alluded to, Islam was scheduled to fight Oliveira. Oliveira had to pull out, and Volk took his place. Volk was completely outmatched in that one, and I'm a big proponent of the always be ready mentality. If you're on the UFC roster, be ready to fight tomorrow, and especially when you're a huge name, that's especially true, because you're making a decent living from being a fighter, and you don't need to have another job just to survive. Literally, your job is to stay fit and work on your craft. Islam had as much time to prepare for Volkanovski as Volkanovski had to prepare for Islam. Now, the peculiar thing that comes into play here is Volk wanting to be a simultaneous 2-division champ, because his fight before this one had been at featherweight, and if I remember correctly, he weighed in, I think, at 145.5. I got the numbers mixed up. 154.5 for this lightweight matchup. So presumably he walks around that weight, or maybe a little bit lighter. So yeah, you can argue that if he had more notice, he could have bulked up a little bit, but I don't necessarily see that having an impact on this fight. In fact, Islam tried to grapple with him to no avail. Volk was looking good against the cage, and he's the one who broke away from the clinch, which ultimately led to the knockout. And you could see that Islam was headhunting from the jump. He came out all kicks, a lot of front kicks, but I think he went for at least one head kick that Volk blocked. So I think that second fight would have gone that way regardless, or at least went the way it should have. And it was a fair win for Islam. So I half agree with you, Braun. And thank you so much for commenting your hot take. Again, guys, this is the whole point of hot takes. They're supposed to be controversial. So I applaud and appreciate everyone who has the courage to share theirs. Now, moving on, Martin said, Jorge Masvidal doesn't land the flying knee on Ben Askren. How'd you think that fight would play out instead? Personally, I think Masvidal would have smothered and out-wrestled on the ground, would have got smothered and out-wrestled on the ground. Important distinction to make. Yeah, I mean, look at Masvidal's fights after Askren, other than Nate Diaz, Kamaru, Colby, and to a lesser extent, Gilbert Burns. They all took that approach with Masvidal. No one wants to stand and trade with him, and it works. Once you have him on the ground, especially in the later rounds, Masvidal didn't have grappling stamina, right? So you're grappling with him in round one. Sure, he'll have the power to get you off him, pop back up, but keep pushing it. And by round 3, he's just surviving under you. I don't think it would have been an exciting fight. I don't think Askren was an exciting grappler, but he would have won a decision. I agree with you, Martin. We would have missed on a huge, memorable moment, and I'm glad it went the way it did. Next up, we have Reverse Axis, who said, the Korean Zombie wins the belt at some point if he didn't have to serve in the Korean military. Now, to be honest, I don't know if he would have been given another shot. I mean, obviously, he did a couple years ago, but I mean, in that time period where he was away. So, his last fight before he left for the military service was a shot at the title against Jose Aldo. 2013, this was Aldo's prime. And Korean Zombie just did not look like himself in that fight. I think he landed like 17 strikes, probably significant strikes, in 4 rounds, which is something he'd normally do in like half a round. I think maybe the hype, the nerves got to him, and then he was gone for 4 years. But that fight did nothing to sell a rematch against Aldo. So I think the title defenses, the Ricardo Lamas, the Chad Mendes fights would have happened anyway. Then you've got Conor coming in, and I think Mendes was the right opponent for that interim title fight, even though he had been beaten twice by Aldo. At that point, he was keeping super active. In the previous title fight, the second Aldo Mendes fight, it was a title fight, and it won fight of the night. So he was a big name in the division, undefeated except for Aldo. So I think he was the right gatekeeper for the belt, for the interim title, is what I'm trying to say. And then you have Conor, who's Conor. He was a marketing machine, so that spot would always have been his. Where I could have seen Zombie being slotted in was the 2016 interim title fight, which ended up being between Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar, because Frankie Edgar beat Chad Mendes in 2015, and I'm not convinced that Zombie could win against Chad Mendes, but we do know that he could get a win on Frankie Edgar, because he did that later in 2019. So had Zombie been active during those years, maybe he fights Edgar sooner in his career. I mean, the Mendes fight, Frankie Edgar versus Chad Mendes, was like a 2-minute KO. So Frankie Edgar is ready to go late winter, early spring 2016. If they fight then, and Korean Zombie wins that one, then he had an argument to get a rematch versus Aldo for the interim title in July 2016. And then if he won that, learns from his first fight against Aldo, wins the interim title, he would have become champion by default. When Conor was stripped of the title, and then he faces Max in the first title defense, and we know how that goes. Those are the ramblings of a lunatic. But what I'm saying is, I've kind of convinced myself that Reverse Axis might have been onto something. Okay, let's switch gears and look at that one dude's hot take. He said champion Robbie Lawler would have KO or TKO'd Conor if that super fight happened in their primes. Okay, so we're talking like 2014, 2015 Lawler versus surely not a welterweight Conor, because okay, when was Conor's prime really? Because I tend to think about Conor's peak in terms of hype and not necessarily fight form. But his prime probably was at featherweight, right? Because he never lost a fight at feather. Presumably he only stopped being able to make weight. So we're talking pound for pound, around the same era. I kind of think Conor was the better striker. I would have seen that going Conor's way. But I love the thought exercise from that one dude. And guys, let me know what you think in the comments. But let's stick with Conor for a sec. Dan said Conor McGregor would have beaten Khabib if he didn't take a year off and earn millions of dollars. And look, Dan, people are going to come at you in the comments for this one, but I appreciate you contributing to the channel. So I'll stand in the line of fire with you, okay? And I'll say, could Conor have beaten Khabib? Because, yeah, while I agree that leaving to box changed the course of his career pretty dramatically, you know, with the boxing and then Khabib and then his negotiation with the UFC and then the pandemic, we lost Conor somewhere along the way. But I don't think that made the difference here. I think in the Khabib fight, in the moments where they were on their feet striking, Conor looked to be the better fighter. Khabib did get that one beautiful right hand in the second round, but otherwise Conor was controlling the pace. He had Khabib flinching, he had Khabib tired. The third round easily went to Conor. So I think if we get rounds 4 and 5, we might see a different result. If Conor has better takedown defense, the likes of Quinta, Edson Barboza, we might see a different result. And so, to your point, Dan, maybe if, you know, Conor works on his takedown defense for a year instead of boxing, we see a different result. I also think that had there been a rematch, Conor's camp could have taken a lot back from the first fight, and Conor could have won the rematch. So I'll double down on what you said, Dan, and say that if Conor hadn't stepped away in 2019, he could have beaten Khabib. I don't know if it would have been too much of a liability to have them fight again. Although the interesting thing is that, again, since this is a hot takes video, I think Conor was kind of ready to squash the beef and make peace before the end of that fight. I think at the beginning of the third round, it looks like he maybe wants to touch gloves with Khabib. But anyway, all this to say, you know, we often look back at Khabib as being this unstoppable force, and there's no denying that he is one of the GOATs, but I don't think it's that black and white with him. And I think Conor had one of the best shots at beating Khabib. I think it was a possible outcome in our reality. Okay, I think we have time. Let's stick with the topic of Khabib, and actually let's finish the video on this one. Braun said Ferguson would have beat Khabib, and Michael said a lot of people talk about how it's such a shame that Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov never got to fight, even though it was booked so many times. But I don't think it would have been much of a fight. I truly believe prime Khabib Nurmagomedov would have destroyed prime Tony Ferguson if they had actually fought. So for the sake of argument, let's take the 2017 fight as our starting point. UFC 209 would have been for the interim title, I think, off of Conor, right? But Khabib had issues during the cut and the fight was cancelled. One of, I think, 5 times that this fight has been cancelled. I'll keep my opinion short before my camera gives up on me. Decision win for Khabib. I think it would have been a really fun fight though, so in all fairness, the real losers are us clowns who never got to see the fight. But I've been rambling long enough. I want to hear from you in the comments who would have won the cursed matchup, Khabib or Tony. And as always, let me know about your hot takes, whatever they may be, about the UFC or MMA in the comments. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I said this at the top, but I love making these UFC hot takes videos. And I'll see you in the next one.